Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're going to pull at a thread that is, well, honestly, it's pretty uncomfortable, but absolutely fascinating. We're looking into the hidden costs of animal slaughter. We'll be moving from a simple, everyday act all the way to how it actually impacts our burning planet. So let's jump right in. Picture this everyday scenario for a second. You reach into the fridge. There's no animal in there, right? There's no knife. We buy this perfectly packaged meat without eyes, without fear. But the reality is, the act of killing still happened. We're just completely disconnected from it because someone else had to perform that act so we wouldn't have to. The real question we're exploring today is who are those people and what does doing that job actually do to a human mind? So, who actually does the grueling work of filling that fridge? Because let's be real, nobody grows up dreaming of working on the kill floor. It's work filled by the vulnerable, not a career path that's eagerly chosen. In the US, meatpacking plants deliberately set up shop in rural areas with notoriously weak labor laws. Over in the UK, an estimated 70% of slaughterhouse workers are migrants. And in India, this massive slaughter workforce remains almost entirely unstudied and uncounted. This work consistently falls to people lacking economic or legal security, people who kill thousands of beings a shift while remaining entirely invisible to the rest of us. Now, psychologists actually have a clinical term for what repeating that kind of violence does to a person. It's called perpetration-induced traumatic stress, or PITS for short. In plain, beginner-friendly terms, it's psychological trauma caused by doing harm, not just by surviving it. This was actually first studied in combat soldiers, where researchers found that those who personally killed showed much worse psychological outcomes. For slaughterhouse workers, repeating this act thousands of times a week literally fractures the mind. It forces the psyche to break into pieces just to keep functioning on the line. You know, historically, humanity processed this trauma entirely differently. Across many ancient hunting cultures, taking an animal's life came wrapped in ritual. We're talking about things like native prayers of forgiveness. They weren't naive about death at all. They understood its heavy psychological cost and outright refused to leave it unmarked. But modern workers, they don't get rituals. They're forced to build a massive mental wall of separation, convincing themselves that the live animal is entirely different from the meat leaving the building just so they can survive their shift. And when that mental wall breaks, it happens in truly horrifying ways. There was undercover footage in a UK slaughterhouse that once showed staff using live animals as ashtrays and actively mocking them. It is so easy to just feel disgust when you hear that. But we have to step back and ask ourselves objectively, are these workers just monsters, or are they what we made out of reluctant, unwilling people? Did they arrive broken, or did the system break them just to keep the line moving? Here's the thing. This trauma refuses to stay neatly contained on the kill floor. It builds up and it spills over into society. Back in 1999, researchers noted that childhood animal cruelty and human-directed violence often emerge in the exact same period of life. Fast forward to 2009, researchers identified what's known as the Sinclair effect, which showed that slaughterhouse employment actually predicts higher local arrests, including sexual offenses, in rural counties. This is known as the link. Violence against animals often spills over into domestic violence. It's a connection so undeniably strong that in 2016, the FBI finally began tracking animal cruelty as its very own crime category. Now, this connection isn't just some modern data-driven realization. It is a centuries-old intuition. Philosophy has been pointing this out for a long time. The philosopher Leo Tolstoy famously warned that as long as there are slaughterhouses, there will be battlefields. Pythagoras echoed something very similar, warning that as long as men massacre animals, they will kill each other. Now, while unverified historically, this ancient philosophy warned us long before we had any hard crime data about the societal consequences of designing systems to disassociate from mass violence. But listen, you don't actually have to work in a slaughterhouse to experience a gentler version of this disconnect. We call it the meat paradox. There was this fascinating experiment where one group was told they were about to eat meat, and another group was told they were eating plants. The group anticipating meat instinctively rated animals as having less of a mind and less capacity for pain. It's incredible. Even ordinary consumers use this psychological trick. We subconsciously shrink an animal's inner life just to open the fridge door without feeling a shred of guilt. Psychologists call that trick moral disengagement, shrinking a victim's inner life to keep harm at arm's length. But what happens when you turn that dial all the way up? It becomes the oldest mechanism in mass violence, animalistic dehumanization. This is the process of lowering the moral cost of harm through language, specifically by drawing on categories that are already associated with danger and disposability. To see exactly how dark this gets, you just have to look at the language of genocide. Genocide researchers objectively document how Nazi propaganda depicted Jewish people as rats and vermin. In the Rwandan genocide, they use the word inyenzi, which means cockroaches, for the Tutsi. Notice what's happening? It doesn't invent disposability. It redirects an existing permission we already have to dispose of pests. It weaponizes the word animal against humans to severely weaken our natural restraint against harming them. It echoes a pretty chilling philosophical thought. If animals had a religion, humans would undoubtedly be their devils. But language alone doesn't keep a body killing past the absolute point of exhaustion. For that, we have the moving disassembly line. To push a human body to perform this violence continuously, the modern system takes a page from Henry Ford and splits one complete act across many, many hands. One worker restrains, another stuns, another cuts, another packs. By doing this, the responsibility is completely shattered. No one has to actually call themselves a killer because everyone is just doing their one small part. Psychology explains exactly why this division of labor works so flawlessly. Distance makes continuing easy. You've probably heard of Stanley Milgram's famous shock experiments, right? 65% of ordinary people obeyed orders to deliver what they thought were dangerous shocks to a stranger. But, and this is crucial, when the victim was moved into the same room, closing that distance, obedience plummeted. Fracturing responsibility and maintaining distance is the key. It allows ordinary people to carry out actions they would normally flat out refuse to do. Now take that psychological distance and combine it with absolutely punishing line speeds. These conveyor belts move so incredibly fast that workers are pushed well past natural human endurance. To keep pace with the machines, researchers note that workers frequently rely on stimulants. It eerily echoes World War II, when the German military distributed 3.5 querpervitin methamphetamine tablets to soldiers just to suppress the body's natural signal to stop. It's a chemical way to force a body to keep going when it desperately wants to quit. And because of this incredibly efficient, hyper-distanced system, the scale of what we're actually doing is almost impossible to comprehend. Globally, between 48,000 and 92,000 animals are killed every single second. Literally, just in the few seconds it took me to say that, hundreds of thousands of lives were ended. When you zoom out to look at the annual figures, they are just staggering. 8,300 crore land animals, 1.1 to 2.2 lakh crore wild fish, tens of thousands of crores of farmed fish and crustaceans. When you reach scales of lakhs and crores, trillions of lives, the arithmetic of death is so overwhelmingly massive that the numbers completely stop feeling real to the human brain. There's actually a clinical term for this inability to comprehend mass scale. It's called psychic numbing. Coined by psychologist Paul Slovic, it explains how our compassion actually flattens as the stakes grow, instead of scaling up with them like you'd think it would. Past a certain size, mass death just becomes arithmetic. It prevents us from feeling the true weight of the tragedy. It's a psychological defense mechanism for sure, but it is a highly dangerous one. Because this psychic numbness, it allows planetary costs to skyrocket entirely unchecked. This system isn't just killing animals, it is literally burning the planet. Animal agriculture introduces massive inefficiency. We're growing huge amounts of crops just to feed animals rather than feeding humans directly, and it drives nearly 90% of global deforestation. The hidden environmental and health cost of the entire global agro-food system is a staggering 12.7 trillion US dollars, or roughly 106 lakh crore rupees, every single year. That is a massive cost that you will never see printed on your grocery receipt. But here is where we find a really interesting path forward. Human cognition can actually run in reverse. Researchers study something called moral expansiveness. This is the act of extending our moral concern across all beings, including animals, plants, and ecosystems. And this isn't just some hopeful, feel-good philosophy. It's real, evidence-based science. Studies show people who widen their moral circle are measurably more likely to support conservation. Expanding who and what we care about is a genuine, proven way to slow down climate damage and exploitation. And the really inspiring part? This circle has moved before. History shows us that slavery was dismantled, women won their rights, and children finally gained protection. Now, these shifts were fiercely resisted at the time, but they happened because someone looked at who was being excluded and bravely refused to accept that boundary as permanent or natural. The line can always be moved. Which brings us right back to where we started, standing in front of the refrigerator. The real question here isn't as simple, am I a violent person for eating meat? That's way too easy. The real question is, What invisible system of suffering had to be built, and who had to carry the psychological and physical weight of it, just so my part in this could feel like absolutely nothing happened at all? So, we're going to end this explainer note with some neat, tidy conclusion, but with a pretty haunting introspection. What does our moral circle currently leave out, and what makes us so completely sure the exclusion stops there? Because historically, it never does. Take a moment to think about who is standing just outside your circle today. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I'll leave you to ponder that.